Are you okay?
Here is the spreadsheet. So this first page, the instructions, what you'll notice that each of these tabs is color-coded, and they're color-coded along these lines. So this instruction here relates to market size. This one is to subscribers and revenues. You've got Capex, we've got funding, and the balance sheet. Now, these last bits, the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow, those are all automatically generated. So you're playing around with the inputs earlier on in order to generate the P&L and balance sheet. So what you kind of want to do is to input some figures, look at the P&L and balance sheet, and then you can start to see, as you change at one end, what happens at the other end, if that makes sense. So here's the market size. So obviously, it says only edit the yellow blocks. So you're only putting in the information into the yellow blocks. So here, for example, here's your market share. So the default spreadsheet says 5% in the market share, and this is year one. So if you put in 100%, you're going to struggle to kind of convince anyone that you're going to get to 100% just like that. And then we've got the number of tourists, and you can start to think about what kind of you're going to capture from the actual tourists. What you'll notice is that this information that you put up here is then captured down here in subscriber growth. So if I was to change this, for example, to 10%, you'll see it'll change down here in terms of 10%. Okay, and then it feeds through. So this is year one, this is driving year one, and then what happens here is that this then drives years 2 till 5. And 2 till 5 is looking at the growth rate. So how do you think that those subscribers are going to grow? So we've said, for example, that 50% in year 2, the market share, the subscribers in urban is actually going to grow by 50%. So this number here is taking this number here and increasing it by 50%. Okay, so you can actually start to see each of those growth areas. And again, you need to make sure that what you're doing is you're putting in something that looks reasonable based on your experience of the market, and that's something you can sell. So what you've got is you've got some drop downs as well to help you. So you can only put in. You can only put in certain figures. So you can't put any more than 100%. Down here, you've got now this is pretty simplified. So this spreadsheet is not, it's trying to give you a simple model that gets you thinking about the financial implications of your decisions. So you guys know the technology better than I do. This is not my area of expertise, but you can probably have different types of technology. And here you've just basically, you can choose one of 3. And this is going to affect the number of cell sites that you actually require. Okay, so choosing your technology, choosing your frequency, and choosing your bandwidth, there's some magical formula that goes on in the background that says how many cell sites you require. And if you have one type of technology, you need less cell sites, but it's more expensive or something like that. So what you're looking at here is the total number of cell sites that you require. So you can see if you increase the your share of the market, you're going to need more cell sites, for example. And obviously you're starting to think about coverage and then capacity. So to begin with, it's going to be all about I need coverage, and then you start to think about capacity as well. So you've got urban, suburban, rural, and then other. So people on the road, for example. Obviously you don't use mobile phones on the road because it's very dangerous, but if you were to use the mobile phone on the road, that would be better. So here we've got, so you'll be able to see how when you're putting the figures through, it's driving the total cell sites required, and the bigger the market, the bigger thing you're going to do, then you're going to require more Capex, for example. So again, it's driving over here. So here's your number of subscribers, which is driven by the cell beside you, and this is then, really the main one is to look at the subscribers, look at the number of sites, for example, and then look at this total number of cell sites that you're actually going to require. Okay. So that's the market size. So once you've set all of those parameters, and here you can actually change your data growth as well. So this is year-on-year data growth. Again, something that's reasonable. So, you know, I update my Facebook once a day, and then next year it's twice a day, etc., etc. So how much data am I actually going to consume, and what am I going to be consuming it for? And again, it's just a chance for you to kind of put in your assumptions, play around with it, make sure it looks reasonable. You know, don't try and sort of, you know, put in 1 million data because that's what you want, for example, and all of that will drive your cell size. Okay, so we then come on to the subscribers and the revenue. So here, once again, you're only changing the yellow cells, and here you are inputting your, you know, again from your experience. So here we've got the blended monthly ARPU for your mobile subscribers. So this is telling me that on average people tend to spend $10 a year with you, $10 a month with you, which works out at $120 per year. Okay. Now, this is going to drive your revenue forecasts. So if you change that to $1 million a month, you'll have some really good revenue forecasts. But I would suggest it might not be reasonable that people are going to spend $1 million a month. So again, you should be able to say in your presentation that we have based our assumptions on X, you know, X number of subscribers paying this much, and this is our experience of the local market, for example. So everything you're trying to do is to try to be rooted back into what you think it should be. So there's your mobile subscribers. We've got the number of tourists, so your market size, how long they stay for, how much they spend per week, and that drives, again, the revenue for the tourists. Here we've got your fixed subscribers, so your market share, how many there are, and again, their ARPU, and the same for any TV subscribers, if applicable, and any additional revenue. So if you think you're going to get any additional revenue, you can stick it in here. Okay, and all of this is going to drive your revenue tab when we get to the income statement, and obviously will drive your cash flow as well. Let's go on to Capex now. Capex is where I hit the limit of my IT knowledge in terms of telco, but what we've got a list here is these are the things that you need, and this is how many you're gonna need. So if you look at the spreadsheet as it is given to you, what you will find is that what's been put in there is a reasonable reflection of what is required, if that makes sense. So this is hopefully where you've got some techies in each of your teams who will be able to bring their kind of technical knowledge. They'll be able to say something like an IP backbone router with high capacity 400 gigabytes per second is not $700,000. This is now $800,000, or actually we can get it a bargain of $600,000. So you can change these numbers in order to reflect your experience. But once again, if you put it in at $5, then you kind of, you know, you're just manipulating the numbers. If you don't have a tech guy, it's not a problem. Okay, so I would use. So what you've got here is you kind of, if you look at the existing spreadsheet as it's given to you, and just make a note. So I would keep a copy of it as it's given to you before you play around with it, and that gives you a guidance as to does it make sense. Okay, and I think that if you want to benchmark it against somebody else, I don't see a problem with that. The aim of this is not about manipulation. It's not about kind of, you know, I'm just going to put in the numbers that give me the results I want. It's just trying to get you as close to reflecting reality, if that makes sense. This is going to drive your balance sheet, your investment capital, the non-current assets on your balance sheet, and it will drive your cash flow. So obviously, if you have a big market and a big market share, you're going to need a lot of kit. If you're going to need a lot of kit, then you're going to need a lot of investment in order to buy that kit. Okay, so there's all our capex. Down here you have this multi-wrap, which my understanding is that you can if you have something that does a 4G, it'll do 3G and 2G as well. Is that? I have no idea. Anyway, so multi-wrap, it basically increases the cost by 20%. So if you want it, you can have it, and if you don't want it, then it reduces. You guys know multi-wrap better than I do. And then the charts down below just give you a little bit of a breakdown, so they kind of help you visualize And obviously, if you're doing your presentations, you might want to copy these charts and just chuck them into your presentations, and it kind of. So OPEX, very simple. Just looking at the income statement. So the key driver here is the income statement. Everything is expressed as a percentage of sales of your revenue. So what we have split is between direct costs and overheads. You remember this is the direct cost will be the cost of sales, which will drive your gross profit figure, and your overheads then sit below gross profit, above operating profit, and will drive your operating profit, or effectively your EBITDA. And what we've done here is we've just said, just put in some percentages that show the percentage of sales that you would expect to spend on leasing shops, commission, etc., etc., etc. And again, all you're looking for is a reasonableness figure there. So again, you can manipulate it. You can say, I'm only going to spend 0.00001% of sales on leasing shops, but then is that reasonable? Does that look realistic? So you're trying to get as close to realistic. We put some numbers in there. That's a kind of a guideline that might give you something to start to base your answer on, but you're probably going to need to update it. And then the fixed overheads are in absolute dollars. So sales, marketing, and advertising, $5 million in the first month. You know, is that going to get you to where you want to get to, etc. Okay, networking maintenance, nothing to begin with because it's brand new, and then $1 million a year, years 3 and 4, for example. Okay, and again, just a few charts for you down the bottom. So again, if you want, you can copy these and paste them into your presentation if you feel that's going to be useful. Okay, so again, figures here provided are examples only, but you might want to think about using them as a kind of a benchmark. So they're not going to be a million miles away from where you want to be. So then we come on to the funding tab. So the funding tab is looking at how you are funded through debt and equity, if you remember. Now, if you remember, don't forget that you're probably going to make losses in the first few years, and you probably want to have sufficient equity in order to be able to absorb those losses and stop your balance sheet going negative, so you remain solvent. It's not the end of the world as long as you have the cash, but be prepared that the regulator might pick up on that in your presentations, and you'll need to defend if you're quite light on the equity side. So here you will see how much shareholder investment you get. And for simplicity, everything is invested in year one. So we're not going to do a rights issue further down the line. We're not going to take out further loans. It's a very, very simple spreadsheet just to try and give you a kind of gain, that kind of a financial benchmark that reflects your strategic plans. So here's your shareholder investment. This is the interest payable on the loan and the loan value and the loan term. So you can play around, you can actually extend the loan term out to say 10, 15, 20 years. I guess you can extend it out forever if you wanted to actually show it as a refinancing, but I would realistically show it as 10, 15 or 20 years, something like that. Here's the cost of your license fee, and I think this is actually all now locked, so you can only edit the top a few cells. So you're given the 10%, you can't touch the 10% interest, so that's given to you. So you can change the amount you're going to raise in equity from shareholders. You can change the amount you're going to raise in debt from the banks, and you can change the loan term. So are you going to borrow for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, etc., etc. The next one is entirely driven by that first cell. So all this is doing is taking the amount that you want to borrow, the interest that you have to pay on it, and the term of that loan, and showing you actually how that affects over the period. Because obviously, if you borrow $1 million, you'll be paying interest on interest. So the first repayment you make is a little bit of is a lot of interest and a little bit of capital, and the last payment you make is a little bit of interest and a lot of capital, for example. So it's just trying, and you can see the effect of that. So if we go back to the funding, if we would change the term, for example, to 2 years, we can see the loan suddenly actually then just ceases. So this is a monthly basis, and it just ceases after 2 years. So again, you can play around with that. So that is everything that you're actually going to physically play around with. And then we actually get the results coming through on your income statement. So here is your income statement. total revenue. This is obviously coming from the subscribers and revenue, which is also driven by market size. So this and this is driving this figure up here. All of these direct costs will be coming from your OPEX, and there's your gross profit. Here's your depreciation, amortization. Here are your overheads, which are coming from your OPEX as well. This is obviously coming from your Capex. You're given the rate of depreciation. So obviously, if you have a big investment, you're going to have high depreciation, amortization, and you can work out. So you can work out your EBITDA, and you can work out your net profit, for example. So you'll notice here, I'm making a loss in the first year, a smaller loss in the second year, and then by year 3, we've actually broken even and we're making positive, so that looks kind of okay. I would really say if you make a profit in year 1, you're probably punching above your weight, and you might want to go back and revisit some of your assumptions. If you're still making a loss in year 4, the regulator's going to scratch their head and think, do I really want to be offering you this license? So you probably want to be something like that. Losses certainly profitable in year 4, hopefully profitable in year 3. The balance sheet, here's our balance sheet. So here's our balance sheet. So the non-current assets will be driven by your Capex. Think about buying the licenses that you require, property, and equipment. Your current assets is driven effectively. Accounts receivable is driven by your revenue and an assumption that how much are you going to get in up front and how much are you going to get on a monthly subscription. Your cash in bank is effectively driven by the cash flow forecast, which is the last tab. So this effectively is kind of the balancing figure. So here are your total assets, and those total assets will be depreciating over the period. Here's the equity, so you can see the investment coming in from the shareholders. The non-current liabilities will be your loan, interest-bearing loans, and your current liabilities will be the accounts payable, again an assumption on what you need to buy and when you need to pay for it, current portion of loans which are due soon, and then a provision for tax. You'll notice here, just as an aside, that when you look at the bottom, back on the profit on the income statement, so we've got your total overheads, operating profit, there's an EBITDA margin in here, total finance cost, which is the cost of financing, so the loan, is your net profit before tax, your tax and then your net profit. So your tax, you'll notice here, is effectively, it's a negative tax, which is a tax refund. Okay, so your profit figure here is a little bit bizarre because it looks like we're actually going to get a refund from the government. You're not. So typically, what happens with your tax here is that you can carry forward the losses and offset future profits against them. Okay, but it's just the way the spreadsheet works. So come back to our balance sheet. So key things to be looking for in the balance sheet. You want to be looking at this line here and making sure that these numbers are positive. If they're negative, it means you've got a negative balance sheet, and it means you're probably going to need to raise a little bit more from your shareholders. So if we go back to the funding, and we say actually we're only going to raise $100 from the shareholders, and we go back to our balance sheet, the shareholders' interest goes negative here, and that means you've got a negative balance sheet. So you just want to be careful of that. So as long as it makes sense, as long as your balance sheet makes sense, then you're not in problems there. So finally, the cash flow becomes very, very important, as it says this line should remain positive for all forecasts. So if you run out of cash, you have a major problem. So you start with nothing. Here's the cash coming in. So the loans received in the shareholders. This is the effect of financing, for example. This is your customer collections. This is the revenue coming in. This is the cash being paid out. Here's your Capex going out. And again, it's just making sure that your cash is positive. And this number here, this closing balance, is what appears on the balance sheet. So the 25,993 appears on your balance sheet here as 25,993. So that's effectively driving. So that becomes effectively the balancing figure on the balance sheet. So I think the summary in terms of thinking about how we use this spreadsheet, the first of all is don't get overly hung up. It's very easy to get really stuck into this spreadsheet and actually at the behest of your strategy and everything else. So you have, how many sections are you assessed on? 7 sections, and they're all equally weighted. So this is only 1/7. So I would say that as long as this kind of somewhere closely reflects what you intend to do, okay, your strategy, you know, and it supports your presentation, and as long as the numbers on the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow kind of make sense, that you haven't got anything that just looks stupid, then I wouldn't invest any more time than that. What I would do though is that you might want to think about some of the ratios we talked about yesterday and show just that kind of little extra value added, how, you know, our liquidity ratio or our asset replacement or the return on capital employed or anything like that, that just again supports you. And part of that is just to show I understand it. So I understand that the financials are important, and what I'm showing is that my strategy, my plan is a financially viable plan. That's effectively what I'm trying to achieve there. You can only do the yellow cells. Okay, so don't worry about the others. Think about it as a reasonableness, so you're not trying to manipulate it. You're not trying to manipulate the input to get the output you desire. What you're trying to do is to put in an input that you think reflects your plan and make sure that the output looks financially viable. And if you've got that, then you're okay. So once again, I would say, if you've got the spreadsheet on your laptops, just save a copy as it's given to you, so you can always go back. So if you make a complete mess of it, you can always go back to an original copy and start again.